Hello and welcome to my kitchen. Today we're going to make one of my favorite recipes, a super thick 3-bean chili that comes from a really great cookbook, The Minimalist Baker. So let's get started. As we always know, before we start cooking, we wash our hands, we put a hair covering on, and we do mise en place. You always want to read your recipe about 3 times. Number 1, to make sure you have all the ingredients. So let's start with our ingredients of a half of a sweet onion, and I have it a medium dice. A half a cup of carrots. As for carrots, I like to use organic carrots. They're not much more expensive than regular carrots, but I do also peel them. We have 1 zucchini, and we have that diced into cubes. We have 2 sweet potatoes that I have peeled and diced into cubes as well. We have 1 clove of garlic. And then we have 1 bell pepper. So when we talk about a bell pepper, that can be a green, a yellow, or a red. I'm not a huge fan of green peppers, so I like to use the red. So that would be our produce. Then we're going to move on to our canned goods. So I told you it was a 3-bean chili, and we have 3 different types of beans. We have our pinto beans, we have our black beans, and then we have our garbanzo beans, which are also called chickpeas. We also have 1 can of corn. You can use frozen corn if you like, and if you're using frozen corn, that would be about 2 cups. Then we have our 15-ounce can of diced tomatoes, and then we have our, only calls for 4 ounces of tomato sauce, but it only comes in an 8-ounce can. So I opened the whole thing. I probably will use the whole thing because chances of me using another half cup of tomato sauce somewhere down the road this week probably is not going to happen. So I will just put it in, and maybe my chili won't be as super thick as the recipe calls, but that's okay. Now we're going to go on to our spices. So one thing we learned about spices is that you can always add spices, but you cannot always take out. So even if the recipe calls for something like 2 tablespoons of chili powder, which this recipe does, you will have to know your own taste and the taste of your family and the people you're going to serve. So starting with that, it calls for 2 tablespoons of chili powder. This is a dark chili powder. There's many other different varieties that you can get, but I happen to have the dark one, which is very, very nice. Then we have our smoked paprika. Now the smoked paprika is going to give a little bit of a heat to your end product. If you don't like that, you can use liquid smoke, and liquid smoke doesn't give you the heat, but it gives you that smoky flavor. So that's where you decide what you would like to do. Then it has the cumin, and it's a tablespoon of the ground cumin. Cumin is a very potent spice, a very pungent spice. It gives a lot of flavor, so you have to decide, do you want a lot or a little? So start out with a little, and you can always add. It calls for some salt and pepper. It calls for a pinch of salt at the beginning, and then you're going to put a little bit of salt later on. It does call for sea salt if you have. I happen not to have it, so I'm just using a regular table salt. When something calls for a pinch, knowing that a pinch is 1/8 of a teaspoon, or you can just pick it up in the pinch of your finger and pinch it in. So that's our spices right here. And then we have our garlic powder. So we have our garlic powder here. So everything is all measured out. Then we call for our vegetable broth. So for your vegetable broth, this is one that I actually really like, and this is the Giant's brand. It's the Nature's Promise Organic. We only need 2.5 cups of it, so we're going to make sure that we are definitely using our liquid measuring cup when we're adding that out. Then they're going to call for some oil, and we're going to add our olive oil, which I have measured out right there, and it's 1 tablespoon. And then it has a sweetener. So the recipe calls for maple syrup or agave nectar, or you can use coconut sugar, or you can just use plain old table sugar if you don't, or you can actually eliminate the sugar all along. So this is our mise en place. You see that we have everything all set up, and now it's time to get cooking. What you want to do is you want to take your recipe and you want to read it through to the directions and make sure you have everything in place. You want to start off with a big heavy-duty stock pot. You want to make sure it's big enough because many times cooks do not use the proper pots and pans and utensils, and they get halfway through and they decide that they have to change their pan. So you don't want to do that. So we're going to use a big stock pot. You want to make sure that you have a good spoon, a spoon rest, and the first thing it's going to say, put your pan on the heating element and you want to heat it up. After you heat it up, and that's one thing, you want to have a nice hot pan. After you heat it up, you want to take your olive oil and put your olive oil in that pan. And as I said before, what I like to do is I like to take one little piece of onion and I put it in there. And that's my guide to when I know if my pan is hot enough for it to actually start to cook the oven. So I'm listening here and I can hear my sizzle. Okay, so you can hear my pan is starting to sizzle, the onion's starting to sizzle. So at this point, I'm going to dump my onions in, stir it around like this. And remember, and you can hear that sizzling, remember that when you're going to put your garlic in, you don't want to burn your garlic. There's nothing worse than burned garlic. And I can hear this really sizzling, and I'm going to put my heating element down a little bit. And then I am going to add my garlic. Add that there. And the next thing it tells me is, so you can always lift it up off the heating element if you see that it's getting too brown. Okay, so this is getting really nice and brown. And then it calls for that pinch of salt and the pinch of pepper. Adding that through here. The next thing it says is you're going to add the carrots. Add my carrots. I'm going to add my peppers. I'm going to add my sweet potatoes. And then I'm going to add my zucchini. So I have all these things right in here. And we're going to stir it up all nice. And at this point, we are going to cook it for about 4 to 5 minutes, okay? So you want to make sure it's not too high, not too low. You can put it right there. And at this point, on that 4 to 5 minutes, you want to make sure maybe start cleaning up some of your dishes so that you don't have a mess at the end. You're going to clean as you go. So we're just going to do here at about 4 to 5 minutes. Reading the recipe again. The next one is you're going to add our spices, okay? So we're going to take our spices here, and we're going to add it all up, and this allows for the spices to actually go right into the vegetables. So the vegetables are going to absorb it, and we'll cook this for about 4 to 5 minutes. So once you've added all of your wet ingredients, the broth, the maple syrup, the tomato sauce, the diced tomatoes, it's time to add these beautiful beans. And the beans we have rinsed, and you can see all the different beautiful colors. We're going to add this in here. We're going to stir it, and we're bringing it to a low boil. And look how nice and thick this is. You can see, nice and thick. So I'm just going to put it on here, and I am going to bring it to a low boil. Remembering that the boiling point is about 212 degrees. That's of water. Look how nice and thick this is. Okay, so we're going to put it on our stovetop, and we are going to bring it to a low boil. And once it is at a low boil, that's when you're going to add your corn. So the recipe says to bring it to a low boil before adding our corn. And just a note, our corn has been drained and rinsed. So you want to rinse some of that sodium off because we are using a canned corn. So using your hearing, I can hear it. It is starting to bubble. And if I look at it, it is not quite to a boil. A rolling boil is a boil that when you stir it, you're not able to take those bubbles down. But I can see right here, it is at a low boil. It's bubbling a little bit, but not overly bubbling. So I just take my corn, put it in. I'm going to stir it all together. And now it's time to be patient. We have it all stirred in. We're going to take our lid, and we are going to reduce our heat to low. And we're just going to let it sit for about 30 minutes. Every once in a while, you want to come in and give it a stir to make sure it's not sticking. And then when we will be back in 30 minutes, and I'll show you the end product. The cooking time is up. I came over to my stove, and look at this beautiful, thick pot of chili. So now you have a couple options. You can put some fresh avocado on top of it. You can put a little dollop of sour cream. I plan to serve it with a corn muffin. That's the way that we like to eat our chili. So hopefully your kitchen is all cleaned up during this cook time. You're going to cool it before you put it in the refrigerator if you will be storing it. And I just hope you enjoy it. Bon appetit!